Other than that, I'll say I certainly agree with you, Larry.
Here's the circumstance. John mentioned something very important, that we're spending $600 billion plus on the Pentagon, but that's really only about half the story. When you add up the expenditures on Veterans Affairs from the CIA and this agency and that agency, it comes to about $1 trillion. Now, when we get down to the politics of that, what we're going to do about it, you have some choices. You have the choices of people that are going to continue with the same motivation that they've had for the last 15 years or the last several decades, or you're going to look to somebody that has the motivation to look to change this. And we have got to change it. And Larry, you're exactly right. We have to find a candidate that's motivated to change it, and we have to help him do that. If we sit back, nothing's going to happen. But I guarantee you, if some of these Republicans are elected, or if Hillary Clinton is elected for that matter, the status quo is going to be maintained because there's no motivation to change. And without that motivation, it's just not going to happen. And what's happening with the military, you summarized it very well. It's moving more and more towards private contracting, which is more and more expensive and less effective. They don't follow the rules of engagement. In the Iraq War, a lot of GIs were killed and wounded because contractors didn't know what the hell they were doing. And the American people better start waking up to this, because our standard of living is going down, our prosperity is going down, and we're spending $1 trillion on the military, which is not doing their job. And it was said earlier by Ellen, the military is good at two things: killing people and destroying property. That's what they're for. And when we're interjecting ourselves into all these places around the world, it's not going to be effective, because they're going there to do the things that they do well, which is kill people and destroy property. That doesn't win friends. That doesn't make friends. It makes enemies. And that's why we're under more threat now than we were several decades ago. When are we going to learn that, folks? And Bernie is the only politician that I see out there that gives us a chance to learn that. Otherwise, it's going to be the status quo.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is a fellow by the name of Alan Tate. He's been an interested activist in local politics since 2007 in the national and presidential campaigns. He's going to be talking about immigration. Is that too loud?
No, it's just their cell phone.
Sorry.
Stand by, technical announcement. While Mitch was trying to set up a video that Bernie has on his website, but he talks about immigration. I think it's really great to hear him talking about it. And then I'm going to cover some of the issues. I've also got on the website this same presentation that you will see here, in case you want to go back and get more information, and if you missed it tonight. And the other thing is that I also have another document that covers in depth of what Bernie has said on the website, but it will take too much time for us to talk about tonight. But I do have a question for you while Mitch is operating. And the question is, would anybody who is a Native American please raise their hand? I see no hands. I see all immigrants or ancestor immigrants before us, which is part of the point I'm going to be making.
What was the name of it? Native American. Oh, I see. That's it. Right. We're all immigrants, right?
Now I lost my train of thought.
Also take about 45 seconds.
So, in that 45 seconds I'm being timed, Bernie basically is my covering of this whole thing. Basically covers 4 sections, as I see it anyway, 4 sections dealing with immigration. And one of them is what you might call standard immigration, where people want to come to live in the United States, and so they apply for a visa and they get approved and they come. Contrary to that, there are other people who don't apply but still want to come, and so they come, and so we call them illegal immigrants. Then there's another group of people who are desperate, fleeing persecution and wars and all that kind of thing, and we categorize them as refugees. And then there's a 4th group we have now managed to forget what they are, but I'll leave that to your imagination. This is a pretty broad type of a topic, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it in the next, 9 months, in other words, leading up to the actual election.
Our job is to reach out to those Republicans. Our job is to reach out to young people who don't understand the significance of politics for their rights. Our job is to bring people together. We have got to end the divisions in this country between gays and straights. Between black and white. And we have got to also understand that when we bring people together, we cannot forget that there are 11 million people in this country who are living in the shadows. We've got to bring them out of the shadows. It must be about bringing families together, not dividing them. We need comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. You're welcome. So, the key thing about Bernie, you may know a little bit about his background. His dad came to the U.S. when he was 17, I think it was, and he had no money, like most immigrants, but he made his way. And he came from Europe, where they did a lot of striking.
When you get down to basics,
I'll fix that.
and you talk about morality, it seems to me that the least that we can do is a nation which has more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth.
He's right, though.
And so anyway, Bernie's, I think, a real humanist, and he really has a lot of empathy for people, partly because of the way I think he grew up. But nevertheless, I think that's a good set of qualities to have in a presidential candidate and hopefully our president of the nation. And so you probably have already read this overview, but you notice he's talking about fair and humane. It's just left, isn't it? All right. So, he's got,
You want to move it? Is that what you wanted to do?
well, that might work.
Because right on the edge there is where that little thing, far right corner is below the X. That far upper corner, far right upper corner. That's stop there, right there. Now that move, if that's what you want to do, is move it down, click on that, and then move down. That's right. Is that what you want? Yeah.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Let's talk about involving the audience, right? Thank goodness.
That guy there.
So, these are 6 bullets, of which you can see 4 at this point, in which he's sort of basing his campaign relative
Back to
to.
the mic, please.
He's basing his campaign relative to his immigration policies. And so, as probably most people know, it's a pretty inhumane program that we have at this point, whether it's detention centers and and deportation programs, and not really much at all happening to try to keep people here and to make a better life for them. So he wants to change the legislation and do it quickly, and he's got a roadmap for doing that. In particular for one of those groups that I talked about earlier, which are the undocumented or illegal aliens. And in tune with this, he's going to try to tighten up the borders, which is good. Whether you're from Arizona or from Iowa, I guess. But and then he also wants to modernize our visa system so that it'll be easier to get a visa. Right now, it takes about 10 years to get a visa, so that's unreasonable. And then he wants to enhance the justice and reverse the criminalization that is going on with the immigrants. And because if they're caught currently and they're sent back, then they get a black mark against them. And if they haven't done anything wrong, but they get swept up in some ICE program, he really wants them to still have a chance to stay here. And all the people that I am guessing were, that I know that are illegal immigrants, they're all good people. They're all hard workers, and they're contributing a lot to our nation. And I'm talking about on the person on the street level, let alone the employers who need all of these people to do their jobs. So there's a lot that he hopes to put together. And I want to show you some slides in order to get an idea of the magnitude of this program. Magnitude of the problem.
Okay.
So, question sort of is, who are we? We're a nation of immigrants. Nobody's a Native American here. And just quickly, that in 2012, so we'll call that current, there were 750,000 immigrants that actually got naturalized. So this process of becoming an official citizen is ongoing, and that's good. I think that Bernie wants to expand that so that the people who are here perhaps illegally or who want to come and join with the American citizenry, that'll make it easier and quicker for them to do that. There were 42 million, I'll call them firstborn, not firstborn, but actual immigrants in the country. In other words, these aren't people who were born here, these were immigrants that came. And that was recently 2013. So there's a lot of people there. And then we've got another, they say 11 million who are undocumented, so that's like 50,000. And interestingly, of the 40 million, and these are the ones that came in legally, and you can see on the graph that there were 10 million that came in from Mexico in just the most recent years here. And they account for most of the immigrants that are coming into the, well, the largest group anyway, that are coming into the U.S. Now, I'm kind of trying to skip through this as fast as I can because I just want to leave with some what I call memory magnets. Now, whereabouts? So we've talked about the U.S. How about where do they live? And you can see that a quarter of the foreign-born population, they live in California. And here in Florida, we've got about 9% of that total. And there are 9 states that contain 70% of that immigration population. And then look at this slide from Florida. So Florida has 9% of the total, they say 42 million immigrants. And but Florida also has a lot of other people that have come to live here in Florida from, as you can see by the colors, from all over the place, other states. But down at the bottom, it shows the number of people who have come from outside the United States. And there's 21% of those currently, that's 2012. And that also has increased a lot since, we'll say the end of World War II, which is basically in the middle of the chart there, 1940, 1950. So is this a big deal? Is this a big deal to let refugees come in? And people are trying to make it a big deal, but I put this slide in because we're talking about resettling refugees. And there are refugees that are applying to us. There are refugees that are all over Europe. You'll see that in some slides that will come up in a minute. But in the U.S., back in 1980, we had about 210,000 people that we resettled. That's the orange line. The blue line is how much it was approved, I guess, by Congress. And so, but in any case, the case is that we did bring in and resettle 210,000 people, whereas in 2013, I guess it is, we had something like 70,000 people. And now we're talking about, I mean, now being the last couple of months, we're talking about having refugees come in from basically Europe and Africa. The source is the Middle East and Africa of those people. And there's a debate whether it's 25,000 or 10,000 or 0, but it's a far cry from the 70,000 that came in 2013. So it all can be done. So let's see. Since the beginning of last year, so let's say 12 months, the last 12 months, almost a million immigrants have left various places in Africa, and you can see that a little bit in the blue graph at the bottom. And there's a couple more graphs on the next page or two that will point it out a little bit better. But of those million people, and they're heading north, you might say, to get up into Europe and Scandinavia. And interestingly, 970,000 of those people are in Germany. So almost all the people who have left their areas, that have been displaced and left their areas, and left their Middle East countries and African countries, that they are all right in Germany. And that's a huge number in relation to what the U.S. has taken in. So the problems are going to be significant, and that, I think, goes back to something that Ellen was talking about, that we really need to get a grip on this whole thing. And it'll have, I think it'll have a big, immigrants will have, and refugees will have a big impact on our policies and our foreign policies.
Have we actually taken any in?
No. No, not that I'm, not my,
The number we've taken in, I didn't think we had taken any.
The past.
in the past.
Oh, in the past.
2013, 2014,
Right.
you know. And that's the latest data that is available right now.
You
I
may
don't know
not
what.
know the answer to this, but is there a mechanism for volunteering to take a refugee?
I have no idea. It's a good idea
I thought you
because
might have run across it in your
we in the
research.
past, we've accepted students to come in for high school and students to come into colleges. You know, why not other people? Half of these immigrants are males, and the other half are some women and a lot of children. And so far, about 4,000 have died en route. Look at this picture. Yeah, need to wrap it up. We're talking about the Middle East on this picture, and then the next one will show Africa as well. Of course, we know that there's a lot of problems in Syria and Iraq. And so in Syria, there's 6.5 million that are internally displaced, still there. In Iraq, there's 3 million that are displaced and still there. About a little more than 1 million have gone over to Lebanon, and they're really stressed. They're about the size of Rhode Island. Jordan has taken 600,000. Turkey's taken 1.7 million. And Egypt has taken 100,000 or so. So these are the migrant routes. And if you look at the chart on the right with those blue lines, you can see Ghana in the lower left, and as you know, Africa has like a hip that sticks out on the left-hand side, and then it tapers down to South Africa with a point down the bottom. So if you go where Ghana is, which is where that big outjutting is, and then you just go straight across, that's where almost all these refugees are coming from, out of Africa, plus we add to them the ones that are being displaced out of the Middle East. And so they come from there, and they're headed, as you look in the left-hand picture, they're headed, if they haven't taken a boat route, which was the red lines in the Bradenton graph, then they're taking the blue lines, we'll say, to go up into Germany and Scandinavia.
So we have Bernie's wish.
So as we said earlier, almost none of us are Native Americans, so we're all immigrants. And history has told us that it's politicians who basically can cause distressed people to fear and hate foreigners. It's the usual game. And of course we can remember what Joe McCarthy did, what Hitler did, and now what Donald Trump is doing. And Bernie's wish is to pull people together and to counter that Republican viewpoint. So, what's the real cause of this? Basically, it's a middle class distress, and that is that they're economically not doing very well. And this has been going on for a long time. A little bit by a little bit by a little bit, they're having less and less effective purchasing power. So Bernie's got a plan to stimulate U.S. job growth and to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure, and educating the people that need it. He wants to make this education be free for everybody, and he's going to pay for that. He always thinks about how is he going to pay for this when he makes a proposal. And so he wants to pay for it by putting a tax onto hedge funds that are these traders that basically don't get taxed hardly anything at all. And it would be a fair tax, but it would bring in enough revenue to cover this education cost. And he also wants to ensure that corporations pay their fair tax. For instance, GE pays zero tax, and they have for quite a few years, zero tax. So, and they're only one, there's a number of other ones. And then we get to, so he's got a tax reform program, which I'm not going into here, but he also has a Robin Hood tax, in which he wants to tax the people who are really making a lot of money in this country and are really increasing their assets a tremendous amount. And that's what it's called, 1/10 of 1%. So if this is the 100%, this is about 1/10 of 1%. It's amazing how few the number of people are. But they have 40% of the asset improvement. And so we have to bring together climate control, because that is going to cause a lot of displacement of people. They won't be able to grow enough food to feed themselves. They'll also have floods or different temperature things which cause problems in itself. So there's a lot to be talked about by Bernie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Listen, we're going to go right on to the next issue because we're running out of time. But let me just remind you of one thing, and I haven't even mentioned it before. But we are going to move this meeting to a party at Motorworks. So those of you that are still interested and stimulated about talking about the issues, please go to Motorworks. We're going to get kicked out of here at 7:45, and unfortunately that cuts our time down incredibly. So please The other thing is, I see we've got one volunteer here. Thank you so much, Sally. I need some more purple stickers up here. I need people to sign up. We need volunteers. My goal is to have 16 new volunteers per forum. So I only have 15 to go. Thank you. This is Mitch Mallett, a long-standing activist with the Democratic Party here in Manatee County, and Ann, who's been raised in St. Louis, committed to helping others, and a strong believer in protecting our environment. Thank you.
Okay. First, I want to tell you something that it's very important, so listen carefully. Right? I made a commitment to get here at 5 o'clock. I got here at 5:15. I blame the traffic. But really, I got to the library at 5 o'clock. I went in the men's room. And then I went to the sink. In the sink, there's a sign that says employees must wash hands. So I waited like 15 minutes. I said, hell of it, I'm going to wash my own hands. Now, I say this because the Republicans have an initiative. Under Bush, they passed this bill called the Blue Skies Bill. You remember that? Blue Skies gave permission to pollute more, right? So you see labels here, and then they mean something else there. That's my point. And that's part of the problem that we have here with the climate. We're talking about global warming, we talk about climate change because people are talking about, oh, global warming, look, it's snowing, right? Look at all the snow that's happening, right? What they don't tell you is the reason we're having tremendous snow is because the atmosphere is holding a lot more water because it's warmer and it holds a lot more humidity. And then when it does turn cold, it comes down as snow. So remember that next time someone says about the snow. Climate change is real. I want you to close your eyes for a second and picture that you were like in a NASA rocket that shot up, you know, and it doesn't just orbit the Earth, it keeps going out. And we've had these rockets go out, and then Voyager, and they turn around and they take pictures of our planet. And before they even get past Saturn, Earth almost disappears as a little tiny blue dot. Well, that's us, the whole world. Carl Sagan said, everything of humanity that's ever been and ever will be, until we leave this planet, is on this planet. Now, if you listen to Republicans, well, the Earth was created 6,000 years ago, don't believe science, the Earth is so massive, nothing can bother it. That's the problem that's going on here. 98% of the scientists are in agreement, the other 2 are paid by the Koch brothers, right? That's the problem. And really, as humanity, and in Paris, they got together, and they didn't go far enough, but they made a major step forward. We need Bernie in the White House to use what happened in Paris as the first major stepping stone to keep going and go more aggressively. And this is some of the things I want to show you. Bernie says the United States must lead the world in reversing climate change and make certain that this planet is habitable for our children, grandchildren, and their children, and their children, and their children. Because if the planet can't support life, it can't support human life, you know, the Republicans call it, oh, they're complaining about the weather. You know, this is a lot bigger threat than ISA or anything else. And you go down to Miami, you go up to Tarpon Springs and go there during a high tide, the road's flooded because it's coming up. You know, it's shocking, you know, what's happening. Down in the South Pacific, some of the little nation states, that are little islands, they're going to be gone. There's so much water on the planet, it doesn't go away, it melts and it floats, you know, and oh, look at the South Pole, you know, it's getting more frozen. But that's the ocean that's freezing, it doesn't matter. If ice is in water, it displaces the same amount as water or liquid. I won't go into detail, but you can look it up. It's when the ice melts off of Greenland and off the North Pole, which is a continent, and then flows into the ocean, we have real problems. We're going to lose a lot of land mass. You know, they're talking about profits today. What's the cost down the road? It's huge. These are, I can move this here. Okay. So, you know, these are all Bernie's words here. And I'm just going to be paraphrasing some of these things here. But this is the problem, you know, is that we're faced with the reality, and then the people with the money are buying our politicians. And I have personal friends of mine that go, oh, it's a liberal hoax. Liberalism is a mental disease. You know, the mental diseases, you know, if you're that far down in the foxhole, this is what I used to say on my radio show. For those of you who remember, when I had a radio show from 05 to 012 on 1490 AM, you know, I get these callers. I go, you know, you're so far down the foxhole, I have a rope ladder made out of knowledge that you can climb up and pull yourself out. This is what Bernie's fighting here. The oil companies, coal companies, electric utilities spend a staggering $2.25 billion on federal lobbying. And that's in 2009, another $330 million in federal campaign contributions. You know, we give like 100 times more subsidies to oil and gas and coal industries than we do to solar and wind. And then you hear out of the Clear Channel and the Foxhole, you know, when solar is ready to stand on its own economically, it will, but it's not viable, it's not viable. It doesn't matter if it's viable, it's the right thing to do. That's what government does. In this country, and Bernie has said this, has a history. When Eisenhower, right, he was a Republican, right? And he said, you know what, we need an interstate highway system to make this country more efficient. Now, he had to use the argument, we need to move the military around. But it was more for commerce. That's because private enterprise didn't have the resources to build the interstate highway system. You know, even Lincoln was pumping federal dollars into the railroads during the Civil War because the private enterprise couldn't do it. What has made America great, and this is Bernie saying this, is a partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And when the private sector doesn't have the resources or the motivation to invest that money, because some of the money invested would take 30 years to get back, that's where the government steps in. That's called infrastructure. And the Republicans, they don't want to spend money on infrastructure because they want massive tax cuts, because they want to put more profits in their pockets now. And climate change is just... Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Ann, who's just super awesome. Next few slides here.
Hello. I just want to say, first of all, I think it's really an amazing thing when even the Pope, and this is the first time that I can remember in recent history that the Pope actually talks about how important climate change is. And that's one thing that I think is really amazing. And it's not just, I'll just kind of go on this a little bit, but it's not even just that when you talk about climate change, that connects to, that's basis of so many other things. That affects famine, that affects immigration, that affects really a lot of economic issues. A lot of other things are based off of that. So if we can fix the climate, then that's going to prevent a lot of other things from going on. So it's a very preventative thing, and it is stoppable, and we can fix it. And that's the biggest thing, I think. How do you move this slide?
This is arrow button right there.
And then also, Bernie has also picked up on this too. So he actually was commenting about how the Pope has acknowledged that we do need to address climate issues. And I think that that's such a good thing, because if you have the Pope that goes in there and he's talking about it, and Bernie's picking up on it, hopefully other people will see that. And the Pope is such a huge figure. I mean, so he has really a lot of clout, and what he says really means a lot and is very resounding to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, when Bernie is talking about climate change, there's a lot of people that say that it's just not real, it's not happening, and that basically you always hear, well, I'm not a scientist, but but basically he really uses a lot of scientific evidence, and you can go on, basically, like anybody can say that there's not climate change, but if you really go in there and you do research, you're going to see the ozone layer at the ice cap thinning, you're going to see the drought conditions that are going on. You're going to see also the rising water temperatures, the rising water. So you're going to see a lot of those things that are just actually symptoms of it that we're just seeing come to fruition right now because it hasn't been addressed yet.
I just want to add one more thing about the Pope. The Pope addressed Congress, the joint session, remember? Boehner sat behind, right? Boehner started crying. The reason Boehner started crying was he's a Catholic. The Pope got to him. Because Boehner knows half the rhetoric he says is, what do you want me to say? All right, I'll say that. You're paying me, I'll say whatever you want to say. Boehner got guilted by the Pope in what he was doing. And he broke down and cried, and a couple days later he resigned from Congress. He resigned from Congress. The Pope got to him. He couldn't do it anymore. But think about that. I haven't heard Bernie say that. That's just me. I put that in there. To battle global warming, I made this slide because to battle global warming, we must pick clean energy as the winner. That's Bernie's words. That is so important. Out of Paris, they came out and said, if you're going to invest in the infrastructure to add electrical capacity, whether it's coal, natural gas, oil, nuclear, you got those, or wind and solar. Wind and solar right now is more cost effective to add to the capacity of the grid than the fossil fuels and nuclear. And think about that. So any expansion over our electrical grid and our population grows, the rest of the world's expanding. It's got to be through wind and solar, geothermal. Bernie goes on and talking about geothermal and what they did in New Hampshire, then what the Republicans did to put a pause on geothermal. That's where you grab the heat out of the ground. Wind. Wind is amazing. I just want to share my own experiences because every year I end up going to either Dallas or Oklahoma because that's where my company, where I'm an executive with, Legal Shield, that's where their corporate headquarters are. And a lot of times you drive back and forth between the two cities. And every time I go there, I drive on the highway and I'm passing these big trucks with these massive wind blades on them. And one time we had a convention and across the street they had a wind convention for ranchers on how, so I had to crash that and walk around. And here's the economical reason. One, the government was subsidizing it, but you take a little footprint of about 15 by 15 feet at a cattle ranch, and you put up this big windmill, the blades are way up high, the cattle can graze underneath, and there's a lot of wind there, and they were making the investments. Now the Republicans are doing everything they can to cut those subsidies away from those farmers to make it that they want to put a 30-year depreciation. These are things that Bernie's been fighting. Now I had a slide, but it was on my next version, which I didn't get here. 2 slides worth of just a massive amount of legislation that Bernie has proposed. If you go to Field of Burn, you will find it there under the energy. All this legislation, their proposals, some of it got in committee, got only into committee, some of it got out of committee, some didn't go anywhere. Just think about, and look at the dates of those, and think about, boy, had that passed, and had that been implemented, 5, 6, 8, 10 years ago, back when it was Congress, where we'd be today. Think about the Energy Act of 1978 under Jimmy Carter that expired January 1st, 86. Reagan tried to kill it early, but he couldn't. Had that continued to grow and been enhanced, instead of Reagan taking solar collectors off the White House, where we'd be in this country. Now project yourself, because this is what Bernie says, project yourself 10 years from now, Bernie's done his 8 years in the White House. He coattailed a bunch of new Democrats in the House and the Senate, and we squeaked through all these things. And 10 years from now, when they finally elect Hillary, or who knows whoever, right? And who knows, right? The next Democrat to follow Bernie, who may not even be recognizable in our thoughts right now, where this country would be with Bernie versus Trump. You know, we don't want to be Trump. You know, we can we can eliminate all coal-fired plants in 5 to 10 years if we had the political will to do it. All of them. Let me just finish and I'll take some questions. All right. This is back to Ann.
One thing that is really key is if you look historically, actually in Florida, there was a really big movement to prevent any offshore drilling. And now that the tide on that is really changing now, Governor Scott's actually really trying to get some of those things passed, which is really unfortunate. Because if you look, and I'm going back to Deepwater Horizon, when that happened and how long that went, there's actually, in my opinion, there's actually sea life that still is affected by that. And we were really fortunate here because with a lot of our economy depending on our tourism, that if that would have happened here and our beaches would have been destroyed, just like they were in Alabama, New Orleans, all those areas. So it's really important that we really try to protect our environment from, from oil drilling and just, that also, I'm just going to talk a little about this too, at Amendment 1. If you look at Amendment 1 passed by a resounding 75% in the state of Florida. So a lot of people, and this goes into the watersheds, which are in Lake Okeechobee.
Which Amendment 1?
That was to protect the water and our water resources. So that goes into Lake Okeechobee and in the Everglades, which actually, the water for 1 in 3 Floridians actually comes from that area. So if we don't protect those areas and keep them from like the sugar plantations that are trying to go in there and buy that land to protect it, that's a really big thing. So that's kind of just something I'm going to touch on with this real quick.
Just going to wrap it up here. Now, one of the last things, because jobs, there's right now twice as many people now working in the solar industry than are in the coal industry. Because you hear the Republicans going, what are we going to do? What do you do? Throw all the coal miners out of work? Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, we can reduce the amount of coal by about 95%. You know, coal is probably the only answer to melt steel. And that's what it should be used for. And as clean as you can burn it. But green jobs, we can create millions and millions of clean green jobs. You know, right now, the way the solar tax credits work in this country is you get 30% tax credit. Well, if you're like, if you're a married couple and one is a fire person, the other one's a teacher, and you're making $80,000, $90,000 a year, and you got 3, 4, 5 kids and a mortgage, you don't pay much in taxes. You just got a lot of deductibles. So you end up with a tax liability of $2,000, $3,000, and then you have a $10,000, $15,000 tax credit that's offered to you that you can't take advantage of because you got to pay in and get out. So the solar tax credits right now are skewed for the wealthy. I just want to point that out. I've heard Bernie talk about this. You really want to get serious now. You want to just give people grants. You want to put solar on your house and get a grant. Who needs solar more? You know, an older couple who's done very well in life, and I'll put that on my house, that's cool. 2 people living there, or a family of 7, right? Who's going to reduce it? We are doing this now. We're doing it at about every 28 seconds in this country. We're taking another house off the grid. Right here in Manatee County, houses are coming off the grid. It can be done. I work with Marisol Solar, and I know it, and I see it, and it's happening. And if we could ramp up the production levels of these solar collectors, the price of those would come down to about 1/3 of what they are now. This is what Bernie's talking about, creating jobs. Just And then you get energy independent. Can you imagine having your house, you don't have an electric bill?
Yeah.
Right? Can you imagine that? And what are you going to do with that disposable income? Stimulate the economy. Right? And what's the advantage? We get ourselves off of fossil fuels. We need to show the world that we can do it and they can do it. This is all saying the same thing. This is the culprits right here. BP, the coal industry, ExxonMobil. Bernie says he's not for sale. He's not going to get into the White House and then be influenced by the money. Because we know that Bernie gets in the White House, he's going to do what's right. He's got a moral conviction. When he ran for mayor, when he ran for Congress, when he ran for Senate, you look at his policies. The only thing that's changed in his policies is implementing the better technology. So with that said, it's also against fracking. And solar.
We got 3 minutes to get out of this room, Mitch.
All right, we got 2 questions.
I just wanted to say that Bernie puts his money where his mouth is. As mayor of Burlington, he started them on the path to renewables, and I believe Burlington is one of the few cities in the U.S. that is now 100% renewable fuel.
Wow. Yeah, it's good.
Just in reference to the comment about the initiative that was to protect the state parks and lands and the Okeechobee and what have you, as many may know, it just basically has been defunded by the Republicans so that that money isn't going to go to whatever the amendment was there for. And right now, Florida is going through its biggest struggle for solar energy. So if you want to own solar energy and you want to have the rights to do with that power as you see fit, to let your neighbors use it, to put it in your business and let your tenants use it, right now there's a constitutional amendment. I have petition copies here for anybody who are interested in the state of Florida.
Excuse me, may I suggest that we continue this conversation at Motorworks? This is a bar right on 9th Street. Motorworks is on 9th Street.
Listening to this, it'll be available for replay 24 hours
coming tonight
on Periscope, and it'll also be up on YouTube.